The sun shines brightly over Lagos, Nigeria. A grand wedding hall is decorated with white roses and golden lights. Guests in expensive clothes sit in their seats, waiting for the ceremony to begin. Soft music plays, and the air is filled with excitement. At the front of the hall, Nyah stands in a beautiful white wedding dress. Her hands hold a bouquet of fresh flowers, and her heart beats fast. She has dreamed of this day since she was a little girl. Today, she will marry Tariq, the man she has loved all her life. But something is wrong. The groom is missing. Minutes pass. The guests start whispering to each other. Some look at their watches. The priest clears his throat and glances at Nyah. She tries to stay calm, but her hands start shaking. Then, a man enters the hall. He is holding a letter. The room becomes silent as he walks toward Nyah. She takes the letter with unsteady hands and slowly opens it. Her eyes move over the words. I cannot marry you. I know the truth. Nyah's breath catches in her throat. Her hands go numb, and the letter slips to the floor. A shocked gasp spreads through the hall. People start talking, their voices filled with confusion and gossip. Nyah feels like the ground is disappearing beneath her feet. Her dream, her love, her future, everything is falling apart. But she refuses to cry. She refuses to show weakness. As she stands frozen, a pair of cold eyes watch her from the crowd. Safiya, her stepmother, smirks. She leans back in her chair, satisfied. She has won. Nyah was just 10 years old when her mother passed away. She remembered the funeral clearly, the heavy rain, the dark sky, and the way her father held her hand, his grip weak and trembling. For weeks the house felt empty, filled only with silence and sadness. But then, everything changed. Her father remarried a woman named Safiya. At first, Safiya pretended to be kind, smiling sweetly and calling Nyah my dear. But it didn't take long for her true colors to show. As soon as the wedding was over, Nyah became nothing more than a servant in her own home. While Safiya's daughter, Zuleika, wore the finest clothes and ate the best food, Nyah was given old hand-me-downs and leftovers. If Zuleika made a mess, Nyah had to clean it. If she complained, Safiya would scold her, reminding her that she should be grateful to have a stepmother at all. Her father, once loving and protective, had changed. He had grown distant, too tired to argue, too blind to see what was happening right in front of him. Years passed, and Nyah learned to endure. She studied hard, kept her head down, and dreamed of the day she would escape. That hope came in the form of Tariq. Tariq had been her childhood friend, the one person who always made her smile. When he asked her to marry him, it felt like a dream. For the first time in years, Nyah felt truly happy, but not everyone was happy for her. Safiya was furious. She hated seeing Nyah succeed, hated the idea of her living a life better than Zuleika's. So, she decided to ruin everything. First, she whispered lies into Tariq's family's ears, telling them Nyah only wanted him for his money. Then, she hired people to spread rumors in their community, twisting Nyah's image into that of a greedy, untrustworthy woman. Slowly, doubt began to grow in Tariq's mind. But Safiya wasn't done. On the day of the wedding, she made sure to destroy Nyah completely. She paid someone to send fake evidence to Tariq, photos, messages, things that made it look like Nyah had been unfaithful. It was all a lie, but the damage was done. As Nyah stood at the altar, waiting for the man she loved, Safiya sat in the crowd with a satisfied smirk. She had won. The hall was silent, the kind of silence that made the air feel heavy. The only sounds were the soft rustling of dresses and the occasional cough from an uneasy guest. Nyah stood frozen at the altar, her heart pounding in her chest. Her hands, still clutching her bouquet, had gone numb. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Where was Tariq? Why wasn't he here? Then, the doors creaked open. A man stepped in, dressed in a simple black suit. He held a sealed envelope in his hands, his face pale and full of discomfort. Slowly, he walked toward Nyah. Every step echoed through the grand hall, making her stomach twist with dread. The man hesitated before handing her the letter. From Tariq, he said softly, avoiding her gaze. Nyah's fingers trembled as she took the envelope. She could feel the weight of 100 eyes watching her, waiting, expecting. Carefully, she unfolded the paper and read the words inside. I cannot marry you. I know the truth. The world around her blurred. Her breath caught in her throat. She read the words again, hoping, praying that she had misunderstood. But the ink remained the same, cold, final. The letter slipped from her hands, floating to the marble floor. A gasp rippled through the guests, followed by hurried whispers. She's been abandoned at the altar. What truth is he talking about? Did she do something terrible? Nyah could hear everything, but it all felt distant, as if she were trapped in a bad dream. Her heart screamed, her soul shattered, but she refused to let a single tear fall. She would not break, not here, not in front of them. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her back and lifted her chin. Without a word, she turned away from the altar. Each step she took felt heavier than the last, but she kept walking, past the staring guests, past the priest, past the beautiful decorations that now meant nothing. She reached the doors, pushed them open, and stepped outside. The sky, once bright and clear, had turned dark. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and then, as if the heavens themselves wept for her, the rain began to fall. Cold drops hit her skin, soaking her dress, washing away the delicate makeup she had carefully applied that morning. The weight of everything crashed down on her all at once. The betrayal, the shame, the love she had held so deeply, thrown away like it was nothing. Her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the wet pavement, the expensive white fabric of her gown spreading around her like a broken dream. For the first time that day, she let herself feel the pain. The rain mixed with her silent tears, and under the dark sky, Nyah sat alone, her world falling apart. The rain poured harder, drumming against the pavement, drowning out the hushed whispers of the few guests who had followed Nyah outside. Her wedding dress, once a masterpiece of silk and lace, was now ruined, clinging to her skin, heavy with water and misery. She sat on the cold, wet ground, her arms wrapped around herself, shaking from both the chill and the heartbreak. She had dreamed of this day for years. She had imagined walking down the aisle, hand in hand with Tariq, their future bright and full of love. But now, all of that was gone. Her fingers dug into the soaked fabric of her dress as she tried to breathe through the ache in her chest. Then, a soft hum broke through the storm. A sleek black Rolls-Royce glided to a stop a few feet away. Its polished surface reflected the city lights, making it stand out like a phantom in the night. The back door opened slowly, and a tall figure stepped out, holding a large umbrella. Kofi Mensah. Even through the haze of heartbreak, Nyah recognized him instantly. He was a man of power, wealth, and mystery, the kind of man who rarely appeared in public, unless it was for business. His presence alone was enough to silence the whispers. Dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, Kofi exuded effortless confidence. His deep brown eyes studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp white handkerchief, extending it toward her. "A queen," he said, his voice smooth yet firm, "should never bow her head in shame." Nyah looked up, startled. For the first time that night, someone was speaking to her without pity, without judgment. He wasn't asking what had happened. He wasn't whispering behind her back. He was simply there, offering her dignity when the world had stripped it away. She hesitated, then reached out and took the handkerchief, her fingers brushing against his for the briefest second. It was warm, solid, real, unlike everything else that had shattered around her. Kofi studied her face, then glanced at the car behind him. "Come," he said. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a request. It was an offer. Nyah looked around. The wedding hall loomed behind her, filled with people who had come to witness her humiliation. Somewhere inside, Safiya was probably laughing. Tariq was nowhere to be found. Her home was no longer hers. She had nothing left to lose. Slowly, she nodded. Kofi stepped aside, allowing her space to move. She gathered what was left of her dignity, stood up, and walked toward the car. As she slid into the luxurious leather seat, the warmth of the vehicle wrapped around her, shielding her from the cold reality she had just escaped. Kofi closed the door behind her, got in on the other side, and with a single nod to the driver, the Rolls-Royce pulled away, leaving the ruins of her past behind. The soft glow of candlelight flickered across the elegantly set dining table. The private restaurant, perched high above the city, overlooked the glittering skyline of Lagos. The air was thick with the scent of gourmet dishes and freshly poured wine. But Nyah barely noticed. She sat in silence, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of her untouched glass. The past 24 hours had been a blur. One moment, she was a bride abandoned at the altar, humiliated in front of hundreds. The next, she was here, in a world of quiet luxury, across from a man who had always been a distant figure of power, Kofi Mensah. He sat across from her, composed as ever, his dark eyes studying her with something unreadable. He wasn't like other men. He didn't fill the silence with empty words of pity or try to comfort her with meaningless phrases. Instead, he waited for her to find her own strength, to decide if she was ready to speak. Finally, Kofi leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His voice was calm but deliberate. "You've lost everything today. Your reputation, your dignity, your trust in the people you loved." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But what if I told you that you could have it all back?" Nyah's eyes flickered up to meet his, wary but intrigued. He reached for his glass, swirling the dark liquid inside before taking a measured sip. Then, with a small, knowing smile, he said, "Marry me, and I'll give you the power to destroy those who betrayed you." Nyah's breath caught. The words were so unexpected, so bold, that for a moment she wasn't sure if she had misheard him. Her mind raced. This had to be a joke, a test, a trap. She set her glass down carefully. "You're asking me to marry you." Her voice was steady, but she felt anything but calm. "Why would you do that?" Kofi tilted his head slightly, studying her reaction. "Because I don't believe in wasting potential," he said simply. "You were meant for more than to be someone's discarded bride. Tariq was a fool to let you go, and I don't make the same mistakes as fools." Nyah let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head. "You think I want revenge? That I want to spend my life trying to hurt people who already ruined me?" Kofi smirked. I think you want justice. I think you want to rise above this, to walk into a room and make every single person who doubted you regret it. And I can give you that." Nyah stared at him, searching for deception in his expression, but all she found was certainty. She swallowed hard. "And what do you get out of this arrangement?" Kofi's smile softened just a little. He leaned back, taking his time before answering. "I know your worth," he said quietly, even if he didn't. The words hit harder than she expected. For so long, she had been defined by what others saw in her. A daughter to a stepmother who despised her, a fiancée to a man who never truly fought for her. Now, here was someone who didn't ask her to shrink, to beg, to wait for love that never came. Nyah exhaled slowly. The weight of the past still clung to her, but something else stirred deep inside. A spark, a possibility. She looked into Kofi's eyes, seeing the promise of a future she had never dared to imagine. And for the first time that day, she smiled. Nyah had spent most of her life playing the role others had assigned her, the obedient stepdaughter, the devoted fiancée, the woman who waited for love to validate her worth. But that version of her had been left behind, soaked and broken in the rain outside her wedding venue. Now, she was someone new. The transformation didn't happen overnight. At first, she moved through Kofi's world with quiet hesitation, unsure if she truly belonged. His world was one of power, intelligence, and control. Where business decisions shaped empires and confidence was a currency more valuable than gold. She watched him in meetings. The way he spoke with absolute authority. The way people listened. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone commanded attention. Nyah wanted that. So, she studied. During the day, she immersed herself in books on business, leadership, and negotiation. Kofi introduced her to the best mentors, but he never handed her success. Instead, he pushed her to earn it. When she doubted herself, he never reassured her with sweet lies. Instead, he simply asked, "Are you going to prove them right or prove yourself right?" At night, she stood in front of the mirror, repeating the words she used to be afraid to say out loud. "I am powerful. I am worthy. I am in control." The woman who had once been abandoned at the altar was gone, and Kofi, he saw her, not as a fragile woman who needed saving, but as a force waiting to be unleashed. Unlike Tariq, who had wanted her to be small, quiet, and dependent, Kofi encouraged her ambition. He celebrated her victories, challenged her weaknesses, and treated her as an equal, not a possession. And somewhere along the way, Nyah felt something shift. At first, it was subtle, a lingering glance, a quiet moment when she realized she looked forward to seeing him each morning. The way his presence made her feel steady, not like she had to fight for his attention, but as if she already had it. Then, one evening, it became undeniable. They were standing on the balcony of Kofi's penthouse, the Lagos skyline stretching out before them. The city buzzed with life below, but up here, it was just the two of them. "You're different," he said, watching her closely. Nyah turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "Is that a bad thing?" Kofi's lips curved into that small, knowing smile. Number, it's exactly what I knew you could be. She held his gaze, and in that moment, she realized something. She had spent so long chasing love that she had never considered what it felt like to be truly valued. Love wasn't about grand gestures or whispered promises. It was about respect, about someone who stood beside her, not in front of her. And for the first time, Nyah wasn't in love with a fantasy. She was in love with a man who had helped her become the woman she was meant to be. The night of the gala was unlike anything Lagos had ever seen. The event was held at the most luxurious hotel in the city, where only the wealthiest and most powerful gathered. Chandeliers sparkled like stars above the marble floors, and the air buzzed with conversations of money, power, and influence. This was not just any event, it was a statement, a display of dominance, and at the center of it all was Nyah. As she stepped into the grand ballroom, silence rippled through the crowd. She was breathtaking, dressed in an emerald green gown that shimmered under the lights. She moved with a confidence that made heads turn. The girl who had once been abandoned at the altar no longer existed. In her place stood a queen, one who had built herself from the ashes of betrayal. Safiya and Zuleika, standing near the buffet table, froze when they saw her. Their smug smiles faded, replaced by disbelief. This was not the broken woman they had expected. But the most satisfying reaction came from Tariq. The moment he saw her, his drink nearly slipped from his hand. His eyes widened. His breath caught in his throat. The regret on his face was unmistakable. He had spent months convincing himself that leaving Nyah was the right decision, that she was never meant for him. But standing before him now, more powerful and beautiful than ever, he knew the truth. He had lost something priceless. Nyah walked toward him with slow, deliberate steps, her expression unreadable. Tariq swallowed hard, searching for the right words. "You look incredible," he finally managed to say, his voice laced with longing. She tilted her head, studying him like he was a stranger. "I know." Tariq tried to smile to recover his charm. "Nyah, But before he could say anything else, she leaned in slightly, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut. "You left a diamond for a piece of glass." The words hit him harder than any slap ever could. Tariq stiffened, his jaw tightening. But he couldn't argue. He knew exactly what she meant. The woman he had chosen over Nyah had been nothing but an illusion, a shallow replacement for the real thing. Before he could respond, Nyah turned away, already dismissing him as if he no longer mattered. She walked across the room and into Kofi's waiting arms. He smiled at her, offering his hand, and together they moved through the crowd, a power couple unlike any other. The night continued, but Tariq barely heard the music, barely saw the dazzling lights. All he could think about was the woman he had let slip through his fingers. As the gala reached its peak, the room buzzed with excitement. The wealthiest and most powerful figures in Lagos had gathered, eager to hear Kofi Mensah's big announcement. Kofi stood at the center of the stage, a glass of champagne in his hand, his presence commanding the attention of the entire room. With a confident smile, he raised his glass and spoke. "Tonight is not just a celebration," he began, his deep voice echoing through the hall. "It is the beginning of a new era, an era of power, resilience, and undeniable success." The crowd murmured in curiosity, leaning in to hear more. He turned slightly, looking at Nyah, who stood beside him like a queen, elegant, poised, untouchable. Then, with a proud glint in his eyes, he declared, "I am honored to introduce my new business partner and co-owner of my empire, Nyah Mensah." Gasps filled the room. The whispers turned into stunned silence. Safiya and Zuleika, standing at the edge of the hall, went completely pale. Their eyes widened in horror, their perfect plan crumbling before them. This wasn't supposed to happen. Nyah was supposed to be broken, humiliated, left with nothing. But instead, she had risen higher than they ever could have imagined. Nyah stepped forward, the confidence in her every move silencing even her worst critics. She scanned the crowd, her eyes briefly meeting Safiya's. For years she had craved her stepmother's love, had hoped that one day she would treat her as family. But now, she saw the truth. Safiya had never been a mother to her. She had only been an obstacle, one that Nyah had finally conquered. With a small, calm smile, Nyah spoke. "To those who tried to destroy me, I forgive you." Safiya and Zuleika flinched, almost as if her words had struck them. "But," she continued, her voice turning firm, "forgiveness does not mean a place in my life." The message was clear. They were done. No shouting, no dramatic confrontations, just quiet, absolute dismissal. That was the final blow. The weight of their defeat settled on Safiya and Zuleika's shoulders. They had lost. And worse, they had no one to blame but themselves. As the applause erupted around them, Nyah turned to Kofi. He smiled at her, his admiration clear. Without another word, he took her hand, and together they walked out of the gala, stepping into their new future. Success was the best revenge, and Nyah had just won. If you loved this story of revenge and success, you won't want to miss what's next. Click on the videos on your screen for more powerful tales that will keep you hooked. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments, what would you have done in Nyah's place?